My name is Maximilian Bakenhus, and I'd like to welcome you to this short presentation of our short paper exploring ideas of geoprivacy through social media, Facebook as a case study, which developed out of my master dissertation project in cooperation with Dr. William Mackaness. In the last days, we heard an interesting series of talk around new methodologies of analyzing and interpreting data. But as Peter Parker already knew, with great power comes great responsibility, and thus I'd like to focus this presentation again on the aspect of privacy, and here more in a narrow sense, geoprivacy. So relating to the talk before, what is geoprivacy? Is it the safeguarding of coordinates with obfuscation technologies? Yes, certainly, but I think there is even more to that. In a wonderful paper from 2016 titled Geoprivacy Beyond Coordinates, McKinsey pointed out that geoprivacy needs to be extended well beyond the mere protection of coordinates. He basically states that everyday digital footprints, such as timestamps, geosocial check-ins, short media messages, are indicative of a user's location. And indeed, the matter should be understood as a conglomerate of semantic layers that contain a location signature in both space and time. The integration of contextualizing information achieves here to create place from a mere space. These place-based information, contextualized as they are, have a huge abusive potential, which is wonderfully illustrated in another very interesting read from Shoshana Zuboff in 2019, titling The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. In our study, we focused on social media data collection, as it's a known hub for data generation, and most of its users are still blissfully unaware of the implications their digital signature inherits when accepting the terms and conditions in the blink of an eye. Further, we found ourselves that the matter of privacy is quite an abstract subject, which brings me to why we've started this project. So this journey started when I began to explore myself what was known about me on the internet. Crawling through my own Facebook profile, I was stunned time and time again on how much data was gathered over the years, even though I considered myself being quite a conscious person. The discrepancy and the process of learning I had myself led to the question, how are others actually feeling about this when they would see it? Could I raise the same vigilance and awareness I experienced in others if I enable them to explore their data themselves? So this very personal journey found a strong supporter, William Mackaness, who just said, let's do it, and who helped me giving this whole project the scientific substance it needed. We came up with 3 core questions to which we sought answers. The first one is that does exposure to visualized digital footprints increase the user's awareness towards privacy? Second, are users more willingly to inform themselves on data protection after exploring their digital history? And third, are users aware of spatiotemporal attributes of their internet actions and thus of the geographical part to privacy, the geoprivacy? So to answer these questions, we needed a way of making these raw strings and numbers accessible. A tool was born, which I titled ADAMS, an abbreviation for explorative data analysis of massive social network footprints, which translated raw data into contextualized information by connecting multiple semantic layers retrieved. Finally, these records were used to create an interactive explorative data analysis dashboard in which the participants could play with graphs, maps, and tables, searching for patterns in their data. To go into a bit greater detail, here is a technical model of ADAMS, starting on the top left with the user retrieving the data from their personal Facebook web page and uploading those compressed JSON files to a web server, in which these files are then translated into a local SQLite database, which is then queried and rendered using Flask, Jupyter, and the Voila rendering engine. The implemented features are listed on the right, and the whole technology was built using open source products and Python at its core. The prototype is currently not yet published, but will be continued as an open source project on GitHub, inviting other developers to join. So here is, for instance, an example on how this looked from a user's perspective, starting from the top, where my participants entered their privacy settings in their private Facebook profiles, requested the data to be retrieved in a raw JavaScript object notation. Some of you may have entered these pages as well. The JavaScript object notation is quite difficult to read, So this was then basically passed by Adams into the below resulting geovisualizations. One of those is here, for instance, the tab travel directions, in which I plotted IP logins chronologically on a map, illustrating where someone had been throughout their Facebook career. The plot was interactive, and you could click on the icons, which brought up additional informations like what sort of a comment have you made where, what messages have been written, what sort of friends have been added over time. Linking these graphs, showing two-dimensionally which online actions were happening over time, and three-dimensionally where actions were actually happening the most. So we were able to give our participants with that a very new viewpoint on their own digital history. To answer the questions initially presented, we then asked our participants, joining us in a sort of dual approach consisting of a scale-based questionnaire before and after doing the interviews, and a half-structured interview with predefined questions while the participants were guided through the tool exploring their own data. The conversations were then fully transcribed and categorized. In total, we interviewed 8 participants, with each interview taking about an hour in time. Following being aware of the time constraints, I'd like to come to the core of our work and present some of the statements my participants made. So here's, for instance, one example where participants reflected on the importance of privacy when exploring those data sets. I'll give you some short seconds to read that. Next, we have some statements where we had two tabs, one of which was called your address book and the other one was called your Facebook history. The address book showed basically how Facebook enabled to synchronize the private phone contacts with the personal profiles, and the Facebook activity history explored what sort of website you have been visited outside of Facebook. Facebook achieves this by reading stored logins from locally saved cookies in open browser sessions, and by those little blue like icons, which you can find on many websites and which are retrieved from Facebook servers. So this enables then Facebook to cross-reference your IP with the website. 2 more. Here, one extended statement where a participant reflected on the geography in the data sets they explored. I found this quite interesting, showing basically this reflection process. And lastly, one statement where, which is a sequence statement, a conversation between the supervisor and the participant. Here we were able to show that even when the participant thought always being considerate in turning off their GPS in their phone when not needing it, so seeking to be aspatial, they were in fact very spatially present just by the pure fact of participating. I find this statement reflects wonderfully the potential geopolitical implications such a participation can have. Right, so jumping to our conclusions. Initially, our participants had quite a poor awareness of how activities, patterns of association could be constructed from time-standard geolocated data. But when they explored their data, they responded in strong, mostly negative responsive to the visualized data and stated to have an increased level of vigilance afterwards. All stated to have a personal threshold for the amount of exposure being acceptable, and many saw it crossed by the data being presented. Most complained having no opt-out mechanism, nor meaningful alternatives, which gave them the same means to participate in their social lives. So if we consider then digital access as a human right, we need to address and raise the question about the role and responsibility of governments in this matter. And finally, we found these responses being quite a strong argument in favor of the importance of education. Geospatial and general digital awareness is not inherited, it needs to be taught and made accessible if we'd like to have responsible digital citizens of the future. Here, we think we as GIS professionals, academics and organizations have a duty of care to provide our expertise in this matter. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd like to recommend these very two interesting reads to explore this topic further.
Does the data collected come from the messenger on Facebook or the Facebook app, or would it work for people working with the Facebook web pages that don't use the app?
So all three of them, yeah.
Great.
But basically, if you have, for instance, the Facebook Messenger, it asks you initially to accept, say, okay, I'm accepting these terms and conditions and syncing my phone contacts, and with that, automatically the data of your whole phone is gathered and stored in your Facebook profile.
Okay, that's great. And just for a simple software development question, so the data is obviously coming in JSON format. So I assume that if you can tap into other social media platforms that provide some kind of exposed JSON service, then you could offer some type of a thing for Instagram or others in the same way. Would it require much additional development?
Well, that's hard to say. I think indeed there can be, there is a huge potential for cross-referencing what we've done, and I'd really like to continue this project and invite other developers to join. But for instance, this data here was not acquired by basically web scraping or anything, but rather by what the users provided themselves. So if you'd like to, for instance, build a platform where a user could explore their own history, then I think it would be significantly easier to implement, because the user needs to get the data basically together, and then you can see how could this be cross-linked exploratively. But scraping this data could be quite tricky.
Yeah. So a final question from Nick, and actually it was along the lines of my second question that I was around awareness. So if we're told that a certain food is bad for us to eat, does it increase our awareness? So Nick is asking, could a tool like this be used to improve education around these issues and increase awareness? Because maybe actually, as you said, from your participants, seeing what's happening is a far greater wake-up call than just being told by the media or otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is about the last point we were making here. I think tools like that could very well be used, for instance, in schools. And I think that basically the part of where we should start with educating people should start before the university, because the problem also starts before we enter the university. And yes, such tools could well be used in a school environment, I guess.